Do you have a powerful GPU and want to push it to its limits? I'll show you some of the most graphically demanding PC games in 2021 in this video. So, without further ado, let's get this video started. The first game of this video is Crysis Remastered. We were almost ready to put the iconic "Can it run, Crysis?" meme to rest and go on with our lives before the arrival of Crysis Remastered. Crytek, on the other hand, had different ideas and opted to boost the ante by remastering the game's visuals with enhanced lighting, volumetric fog, ray tracing capability, and textures with up to 8K quality. Despite the fact that Crysis Remastered is built on the inferior console architecture, it can be rather taxing on most PCs. Next up we have Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is arguably the best-looking game Ubisoft's ever made and features the most detailed depiction of ancient Greece ever rendered in a video game. However, as we've already discussed at length, games of this caliber always come with a price tag, in this case, the amount of a GTX 970 or Radeon R9 290 graphics card. You'll also want to have at least 8GB of available RAM, an Intel Core i7-3770, or the AMD equivalent, and roughly 45GB of disk space. Next up we have Project Cars 2. For a variety of reasons, Project Cars 2 is the ideal test case for determining the capabilities of your gaming PC. The LiveTrack 3.0 physics engine affects acceleration, handling, and braking with lifelike visuals and dynamic weather and track temperature algorithms. There are also multiple distinct racing modes, 140 circuits set on real-world locales, and over 180 cars to try out different settings with. Next up we have Far Cry 5. Another title that utilizes the Crytek-based Dunya engine is Far Cry 5, much to the dismay of Far Cry fans who primarily play on PC. Although it allows for more beautifully rendered environments and realistic physics, it can tough on many mid to higher-range machines. It's recommended you have a GTX 970 or AMD R9 290X, but to get a steady 60 FPS at 1080p or above, expect to need a GTX 1080 or its AMD equivalent. Next up we have The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Even in 2021, CD Projekt Red's ambitious open-world action RPG remains a dependable benchmark for high-end gaming PCs. This is due to the abundance of graphics modifications and built-in options that enable you to alter The Witcher 3's aesthetics and increase the detail on things like character hair and textures. Of course, there is a cost to everything nice in life. CD Projekt recommends a GTX 770 Radeon R9 290 or similar graphics card for the optimal experience. Next up we have Ghostrunner. In Ghostrunner, you play as a sword-wielding assassin charged with entering a heavily secured data tower. With smooth parkour movement and a grappling hook, you scale the gigantic building before zeroing in on a target and banishing them with a cyber-enhanced katana sword. While the recommended prerequisites aren't awful, with a GTX 970 or AMD comparable GPU and just 8GB of RAM, getting the game to run at 60 frames per second on older hardware might be difficult. Next up we have Hitman 2. Some of the most intriguing sandbox stages we've yet seen in a game starring a stoic bald assassin may be found in Hitman 2. Each one is bigger than the previous, with additional win conditions, disguises, and ways to wreak havoc. However, if you want to get the most out of the game, you'll need a GPU that's at least as powerful as a GTX 1070. Next up we have Kingdom Come Deliverance. Aside from being one of the most realistic medieval RPGs available, Kingdom Come Deliverance is a graphics powerhouse that will put your PC to the test. While a GTX 1060 or Radeon RX 580 graphics card is required, you'll most likely need a 1080Ti or above to achieve 60 FPS in the game's more populous towns. That's before even mentioning the game's absurd 16GB RAM requirement. Next up we have Forza Horizon 4. Forza Horizon games have always had an arcade-style approach to racing and are far more forgiving than its Forza Motorsport sibling. Forza Horizon 4 has a large, fully explorable open world with detailed locations and a variety of racing challenges. It's the type of game you'll want to play on the highest settings your PC can support to get the most out of it. While the game demands an NVIDIA GTX 970 or AMD R9 290X, the most demanding prerequisite is memory, which requires 12GB for maximum performance. Next up we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider. The rebooted Tomb Raider franchise depicts a much darker, morally gray Lara Croft than previous installments. Therefore, it seems only fitting that Shadow of the Tomb Raider has some pretty harrowing system requirements, especially when it comes to RAM consumption. The game recommends at least 16 GB RAM for the best results, along with a GTX 1060 Radeon RX 480 GPU, or equivalent, and an i7 4770K Ryzen 5 1600 CPU. However, if you have any hopes of hitting consistent 60 FPS, you'll likely need a GTX 1080 at the bare minimum. And don't even get us started on the requirements for playing in 4K. Next up we have Deus Ex Mankind Divided. At the time of its release, Deus Ex Mankind Divided set a new standard for PC graphics, especially if you tried playing the game using its Ultra preset. Unfortunately, most of us will never get to witness such things firsthand, since even meeting the game's recommended settings will prove challenging for most. A GTX 970 or AMD equivalent to start. Ideally though, a GTX 1080 or better if you want smooth and consistent 60 FPS. Then there's the matter of memory, a recurring hurdle in this list. For the best experience, Mankind Divided calls for a whopping 16 GB of RAM. Next up we have Metro Exodus. The Metro games have become better with each installment, and Metro Exodus is by far the best yet. It has wider sandbox locations, a tighter plot, and a compelling combination of action and stealth-based gameplay, in addition to next-gen visuals. Support for NVIDIA's ray tracing-enabled graphics cards, which substantially increase lighting effects in RTX-compatible games, is one of the game's key selling features. It's recommended you run the game using at least a GTX 670 1050 or above and a GTX 1070 for steady 60 FPS performance. Next up we have Cyberpunk 2077. While it's definitely not without its flaws, especially at launch, Cyberpunk 2077 is one of the true next-gen showcase titles. Of course, this doesn't mean much for PC gamers, where generations are defined by new graphics card lineups. Still, with features like ray tracing support, deep learning super sampling, DLSS, and additional graphics options, you can fine-tune the experience to see just what your rig is capable of. The game recommends you have a GTX 1060 or higher and at least 12 GB RAM for optimal performance. Next up we have Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's worth trying out the current version of Microsoft Flight Simulator simply to see whether your computer can handle it. To create 3D representations of real-world mountains, woods, and airports, the game uses data from Bing Maps and Microsoft's Azure Cloud technologies. The textures that are rendered in to replicate genuine terrain and bodies of water are what make it so difficult. For consistent performance, you'll need a GTX 970 or AMD equivalent with 16 GB RAM. Just make sure you have enough space to accommodate the installation's huge 150 GB size. The last game of this video is Final Fantasy XV. Final Fantasy XV's stunning and meticulously created open environments generally come at the cost of requiring a tremendously powerful PC to fully appreciate them. While we applaud Square Enix for being true to their vision, we wish we didn't have to forego 16 GB of RAM and more than 150 GB of storage space in the process. Of course, many of these issues only apply if you're trying to play Final Fantasy XV at 4K 60 FPS, but you could discover that even dropping the game to 1080p isn't enough. So that's the list of 15 most graphically demanding PC games that you can play in 2021. If you enjoy this video, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel Games Puff, and press the bell icon for more gaming videos.